Hi guys, it's Matt. Welcome to the video. I am a compulsive gambler in recovery and I'm your mind and movement mentor here to help you. So I've touched on this in previous videos, but I want to speak about it again because I feel like this is a really good way to identify if you are a gambling addict, a problem gambler, whatever you, compulsive gambler, whatever you want to call it. Someone such as myself that has a very distorted relationship with gambling, can't do it in moderation. If they do it, life becomes unmanageable quickly and problems occur. And I'm sure there's some people watching this channel that are kind of thinking, you know, I kind of recreationally gamble, I gamble here and there. Maybe I spend more than I'd like to in some instances, but they maybe don't really know what full problem gambling looks like. And it's for each individual person to make their mind up as to whether they believe they have a problem with it. But for me, one of the key telltale signs is the relationship they have with winning money. Notice I said winning money, not losing money. And that, I think, is a big kicker, because for me, that is what problem gambling looks like when you are just essentially, when the addiction takes control, when you're in the fog and the chaos of it, you are just playing to play. It's not anything to do with the money necessarily. Your brain would have you believe it is. There's always an extent of a balance sheet at play, because real world problems will creep in if you don't have money to do this, X or Y, and you cause problems for yourself. But that's not the main driver. It's not the main driver that you want to make. In your mind, you're not focusing as your main goal is to win money so that you can buy X or Y or Z. That part has just diminished. And I've given examples about this in the past when, you know, I've had bets on football matches, and the last kick of the game has determined my bet from being a loser to all of a sudden I've won. And you'd think that it would be the euphoric happiness, but it's not. I've had it on the last corner kick in like the injury time on top of injury time, where it's gone up from not going to come in as a successful bet to a winner, and a slight blip of momentary increased emotion before just back to the baseline. I remember one time I had over 2.5 goals in, I think it was a Villarreal match, and it was 0-0 at 90 minutes and ended up somehow miraculously being 3-0 at the end of a somewhat lengthy stoppage time. And like, you'd say that would, you think, if you were trying to explain gambling to someone else or someone that's not so involved in it, they think that would be like that euphoric moment of just like, yes, you know, like the images that they show you on the casino posters and adverts and things like that. But it really just isn't. And I think that is when you know that there is a problem, because it's just immediately on to the next one. It's almost like your dopamine receptors and your brain chemicals are fried, and they've experienced the maximum amount of pleasure that they can reach in that mode. So it's just, you're chasing, the nature of addiction is you're kind of chasing the dragon, you're chasing the euphoric recall of one bet, your first ever bet that's in your mind's eye of something that was quite exhilarating and quite exciting, and you just think of it as that is kind of like the utopia that you're trying to get back to, even though it's now kind of physically impossible to go back to reaching that. And therefore, you know, you get stuck in a cycle of not being willing to accept going back to your baseline, which seems boring, seems incredibly mundane. You're kind of hooked, indirectly hooked on the neurotransmitters, the brain chemicals, the kind of the mental patterns that have been going on that have been while you're gambling. And that's why you don't want to do anything that doesn't involve gambling, because that just feels like ironically boring. You just want to keep the gambling train going. And a lot of the studies and a lot of the research show for people with addiction tendency type brains. Myself, I've got ADHD. I've spoken in other videos about the very strong link between ADHD and addictions full stop, but also gambling addiction specifically. There is this feeling of the excitement of the magic happens in the placing of the bet. It happens in the anticipation of the outcome. You know, they've even hooked people up to certain technological devices and things like this to see this. One really good documentary is the Paul Merson, who's a ex-footballer and compulsive gambler, where they do this, and you can see certain parts of the brain light up even when he's watching casino images, turns of cards, things like that. So it's highlighting the area of the brain that is associated with certain kind of endorphins, pleasure chemicals, that I'm not going to say happiness, because happiness is more of a lasting, and things, words like happiness and fulfillment are certainly wrong. It's more like kind of titillation or stimulation in the moment that is kind of what's being shown on the screens. And it shows that it's in that waiting, it's in that anticipation, and that's the key state. Almost like when the outcome, the ball drops on the number, or the football match finishes, or the sporting event's over, that's kind of, the show's over. There's no further, that kind of simmers down, which is why you want to then go again. You want to increase the risk factor of the bet potentially that involves more stake, or you start gambling at more frequent intervals because you don't want to wait until the next one. So it's something that I really struggled with for a while, is the idea that it isn't about money, which is something like gambling that's very much transactionally money focused and money orientated. It's a very easy trap to fall into. And then that makes it kind of hard to quit, because you feel like the problems you've got are debt, or are money wise, or are financial. And therefore it can somewhat make logical sense to continue gambling, because you can make rationale, somewhat logical rationale, but most of it is the addiction speaking of things like, my luck has to change, law of averages, gambler's fallacy type thinking of, if you toss a coin 50 times and it's 50 tails, then it's really likely and progressively much more likely to be heads on the 51st or 52nd. So you're almost like a fool if you don't do it and don't stick at it. But yeah, this is one thing that I think is really worth someone who's maybe on the fence as to whether they are a problem gambler, is to maybe kind of look at this. Because I know for me, it was very, very short-lived. I was always seduced back to gambling through the means of finance, i.e. come back and then you can win some money that will sort out this expense that you need to pay for, or you can buy this luxury item that you want, or this experience that you want with your winnings. And this is a shortcut and a quicker way to do that, to get to that thing that you want, versus being more patient, working hard, finding the means or the money for it in a more organic method. But then it would simmer down very, very quickly to, it was just that automatic playing just to play type mode. And then, without hitting you with too many gambling cliches, one very common one is the house always wins. Certainly the more time you spend in gambling activity, the further the house edge or the odds kind of work against you. And then you will inevitably lose in the long term. So something to think about if you are maybe somewhat on the fence I've said before, I make these videos for people that struggle with gambling, that are interested in this kind of topic. It's something that I see just getting progressively worse. The trajectory of the number of people that are problem gamblers and statistics of problem gambling behaviour are only just getting worse and worse by the day, it seems. So if you enjoy this content, please share it with someone who may find it useful in that regard. Always grateful if you can like the video. I respond to all of your comments. It helps me reach more people with a message I'm incredibly passionate about. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you in the next video very soon. Take care. Heyo.